Hi, this is Ted at Valley of the Dolly. I found this really interesting article, this report from the IFO Institute that just came out. And in it, it predicts a number of different things. It predicts inflation that's coming over the next few years. It also predicts the economic stability and political stability moving forward of countries around the world and regions around the world. And in this special report, it also predicted what the real estate values or home values would be in 10 years around the world. So in this particular case, in this video, we're going to focus on Portugal and on Europe in general and what those values are anticipated being in 10 years. So one of the first things that the report brought up is that they expect worldwide inflation to go from 7% down to below 5%. And that kind of gives you an idea of what's expected in Europe as well. They expect inflation to come down dramatically. The report says that North America and Southeast Asia will see some of the lowest inflation rates, and I don't think Europe is too far behind America there with reduced inflation rates. And then it goes through some of the economic and political stabilities of different regions. And for example, it shows that Western Europe, for the most part, is relatively stable economically and politically. And then in Southern Europe, it notes that it expects political instability, the percentage of that is much larger or greater than it would be for Western Europe, which kind of surprised me. And then in the last component of this, in the special article that they included in this report, it is dedicated towards property values. And in this, they note, especially even on the front cover, that in Western Europe and Northern Europe, along with the United States, they expect that property values will increase 5 to 10% a year over the next 10 years. So Germany, for example, they expect an increase of 7.2% yearly in the value of property. Now, if you slide down to Southern Europe, we're going to look at that, and that is different than, it's a different area and it's a different expectation than Western Europe. But first, let's go back to the real estate values of Portugal, really since 1990, because you'll notice in this chart, and I want to go through this first because it gives you kind of a primer, so you realize that even if somebody says, you know, you can expect this increase or on average every year or decrease, it's never really a straight fine line. It's going to be dips and it's going to be hills and valleys, and although it may in the end show an increase. So in this chart, if you go back to 1991, you'll see that there were real increases or nominal increases in the value of real estate in Portugal by 20% at some points in that timeline. And then just a year or two later, you see that property values were barely over 1% at the beginning of 1994. And then those numbers, again, continue to stay kind of low. They shoot up again in the early 2000s and late 1990s, early 2000s to 7-8% a year. And then they drop. So we have that first initial drop that happened same time when the US housing market crashed. And you found that the home market in Portugal, the values were dropping at up to 12%. And then, of course, they rebounded quickly to above zero. So they were holding their own but not increasing. And then they dipped down again into 2010, 2011, 2012 because of the financial crisis that struck Southern Europe. Then after that mess was starting to be cleaned up, you see that property values increased kind of consistently going into 2022. Looking at those increases, it was 4.9% or almost 5% in 2015, 2016 5.7%, 2017 7%, 2018 almost 10%. So you see even in this period, the rate of increase was going up faster and faster, almost 12% in 2019. And then of course we get COVID and it drops just to 6%, but it quickly rebounds in 2021 to over 11%. So what we've seen is a really dramatic increase in Portugal in the value of real estate. Now this report is not looking at what happened over the last 25, 30 years. It's looking at what they anticipate will happen in the next 10 years. And this is based on 1,400 economists from around the world and their expectations of real estate values around the world. And looking at this chart, you'll see that Southern Europe is looking at a 15 to 20% annual increase in the value of real estate every year. But that does not mean that every country inside of Southern Europe will see the same increases in real estate. It means overall the values are expected to increase that much. And the reason I mention this is because there was a note here saying, even so, this quite high average for Southern Europe is mainly supported by the expectations that the economies have in relation to Malta, Serbia, and Albania, says Tim Woshner, a researcher at the IFO Institute. So what we're saying here is that the drivers of this 15 to 20% are really coming from those countries on the eastern side of Southern Europe. Again, Malta, Serbia, Albania, and not as much from Portugal, for example. So although they fall inside Southern Europe, we're expecting 15 to 20%. The estimation for Portugal is 8.2% yearly increase. And yes, that is significantly lower than what the average is for Southern Europe, but that's still a pretty significant increase. And it falls in line with much of Western Europe, Northern Europe, and the United States when you talk about a gradual increase in the value of real estate. And if it is 8.2%, that also means that it's increasing at over 3% above the expected rate of inflation 2 years from now. And that's world inflation. It's quite possible that Western Europe and Southern Europe will have inflation rates significantly below that, maybe 2 to 4%. So if you see an increase of 8.2% a year for Portugal, I also found it fascinating that Mexico and parts of the region there are expecting increases of 20 to 25% a year, even significantly higher than that of Southern Europe or North America or Western Europe and Northern Europe. So I had a couple conclusions that I found here, and I wanted to share those with you. One is that there is no region in the world where they anticipate that real estate values will decline after 10 years. They're expecting that every region around the world will have an increase overall in real estate values. The second is that not every country inside the region is created equal. So it's possible that you have countries inside of those regions which may see a negative rise in home values, but they are not called out specifically in the report as far as I could see. They only broke it out really by region. To look at that 8.2%, I needed to go to the article that was posted by the Portugal News, and they reference a CNN Portugal report that referred back to IFO saying it was 8.2 for Portugal. The other finding that I thought was really important to remember is that it's not a straight line up when you talk about 8.2% a year. I'm sure that this includes peaks and valleys, just like it did from 1990 to 2022. You saw periods of time where you had huge increases and then declines. And I don't really think that in 2005, if you had seen a prediction of market values that they would have said in the next 10 years, you would have seen Portugal going under a negative 12% rise in real estate values. I think that was not really, the economic crises were not really expected at that point. Yes, we thought maybe you might have a slowdown, right, but not a dramatic downturn like that. So these are just estimates. And again, you know, the important thing to remember here is that somebody may buy a property for a short period of time and they may not be able to make that money because of the peaks and valleys in the real estate costs. And somebody who retains that property for a long period of time will likely see overall a significant increase in the values of property. This is Ted at Value of the Dolly. I look forward to talking with you soon. Thanks again. Bye now.